This is Gina, and welcome to Darkness Decoded. In this episode of Darkness Decoded, we will explore how a man manipulated his foster daughter into stabbing his wife in an extreme case of overkill, the likes of which are rarely seen. This deadly betrayal takes place in Willowbow Hills, Ohio, a community with sprawling nature reserves, with charming shops and restaurants throughout. It is considered one of the most picturesque communities in Northeast Ohio, featuring a lovely blend of country and city. Sabrina Zunich was born on October 27, 1994, right outside Cleveland, Ohio, to Susan Edwards and Mark Zunich. Both her parents battled drug and alcohol addiction and were frequently arrested. Her father was a paranoid schizophrenic. At a young age, Sabrina was taken from her home by the state and placed with her grandmother. She was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder when she was just 4 years old. She also had bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and oppositional defiant disorder. By the time Sabrina was 16 years old, she was on 9 different medications. The damage from her childhood had already been done. Sabrina became rebellious in high school, picking fights and frequently losing her cool. When she was just 14 years old, her grandmother thought she was too much for her and sent her to Emma Clayley Receiving Home, a behavior modification institution. She would spend the next couple of years in foster care system, being bounced around from one home to another, never being able to make it work. She was constantly misbehaving, committing minor offenses, and getting involved in drugs, essentially following in her parents' footsteps. In July 2011, at 16, Sabrina was placed with Kevin and Lisa Knoefel. They appeared to be everything her birth parents weren't. They had a beautiful home, great children, everything seemed to be perfect. Lisa Knoefel had a daughter from a previous marriage, and together she and Kevin had a young daughter. Lisa was a social worker for the Department of Children and Family Services and worked in the sex abuse department. She was kind, caring, and compassionate. She loved children and loved helping people. Exactly the foster mother Sabrina needed. Kevin was a truck driver for a food service company, and together they had already successfully fostered several children, ages 3 to 7. Sabrina would be the first teenager they would take in. When Lisa Knoefel welcomed 16-year-old Sabrina Zunich into her home, there was no way she could have predicted the chaos that would soon follow. Once in a stable, loving home, Sabrina started to turn things around. She seemed to fit well with the family and became close to the Knoefel's children. She thought of them as her own sisters, and Lisa treated her like her own daughter. Sabrina started to do great in school, getting good grades and making new friends. When Sabrina turned 18, she was able to leave the foster care system. Instead, she petitioned to remain in the Knoefel's home to finish high school. She dreamed of working as a model or even enrolling in cosmetology school after graduation. But in less than a year, Sabrina's dreams would turn into a nightmare. On the tragic early morning of November 16, 2012, one of the worst calls came into Willowbow Hills 911 dispatch unit. The 911 caller, Lisa's frantic 13-year-old daughter. According to her, Lisa was stabbing her mother to death. The dispatcher immediately routed all available units to the scene. When the police arrived, they rushed into the home, not knowing what they would find. As the officers approached the home's master bedroom, they found Sabrina holding a knife and covered in blood from head to toe. She appeared to be in shock, and the police immediately placed her under arrest. When they entered the room, Lisa was on the floor in the midst of a bloody scene. All efforts to save her life were to no avail, and she was pronounced dead. The police were stunned by the horrific scene. They described it as a slaughterhouse, a complete bloodbath. The attack had been so frenzied that Sabrina had inadvertently slashed herself with a knife. She had several wounds that required stitches and was given treatment for her injuries. After removing Sabrina from the scene, they focused on Lisa's 13-year-old daughter, who told police that she had been awakened by her mother's and Sabrina's screaming. She sprinted to the room to see her own mother being brutally and violently murdered. She screamed for Sabrina to stop, begging her to spare her life. But Sabrina doesn't stop.
I was hearing screaming. I was also hearing the dog barking. And I was like, what the hell is going on downstairs? So I walked down there and Bree's stabbing my mother to death. And immediately I say, "Stop, get off of her," and she shoved me. So I immediately go into the office area and call 911 and say, "My sister is stabbing my mother to death. She's gonna die."
In fact, she stabs and slashes Lisa nearly 180 times. It was a vicious, violent, and brutal assault on an innocent woman who had taken in the troubled teenager. Lisa died in a very painful and violent way. While in custody, as if in a state of utter shock, Sabrina refused to answer any questions and stated that she could not remember anything. Kevin Knoefel was on the road in Michigan when he received the call that his wife had been murdered. He rushed home to the scene, but once he arrived, he appeared to be relatively calm and not the grief-stricken husband. In the days following the murder, friends and family were disturbed by Kevin's behavior. He was acting strange and aloof given the circumstances. There was not that emotion that one would see when one's spouse dies tragically. More shockingly, at Lisa's funeral, he urged everyone to pray for Sabrina. Not only was his behavior strange, but it was also highly suspicious. What led a teenager to stab her foster mother to death in front of her 2 children? As it would seem, things began to change in the Knoefels' home. Sabrina started misbehaving, and her old habits began to surface. While Kevin was the more laid-back parent, Lisa was the disciplinarian. Sabrina refused to obey any rules, and that caused fights between the two. On one occasion, the fight was loud enough that the neighbors called the police. Lisa viewed Sabrina as a disruptive force and began to suspect her husband viewed Sabrina as more than just a foster daughter. Lisa thought Sabrina was undermining her relationship with Kevin. As her relationship with Lisa drifted apart, Sabrina became unnaturally close to Kevin, not in a way that was all appropriate for a father and his teenage daughter. They would make sexual jokes at each other, and their relationship would eventually turn sexual. And although Sabrina was 18 at the time, because she was still in foster care, it was illegal and considered statutory rape. Lisa wasn't the only one who grew suspicious of Kevin and Sabrina's relationship. Friends of Sabrina said that the relationship was more of a boyfriend-girlfriend than that of a father and daughter. Despite the rumors of a sexual relationship between the two, there was nothing to indicate that Kevin had anything to do with the murder. And given the evidence of friction between Lisa and Sabrina, it appeared to be a rather straightforward case. It seems as though the troubled teenager had simply lost it. The investigators uncovered that Sabrina had been plotting to kill her foster mother for some time now. After learning of her murder, Sabrina's friend Autumn posted a cryptic message on Facebook. This information was provided to investigators by a student who came forward. When investigators interviewed Autumn, they learned that Sabrina had been plotting the murder and was asking around for a hitman. She also confided in her friend that Kevin wanted to divorce Lisa. The police started looking further into Kevin and Sabrina's relationship. The more they looked, the more suspicious they became. Could a foster father really have a sexual relationship with his daughter? But every time they approached Sabrina about the allegations, she would deny the accusations and refuse to cooperate. For several months, as Sabrina sat in the Lake County, Ohio jail, Kevin collected his wife's life insurance policy, which he used to buy a house in Florida, several cars, and even took flying lessons. Feeling abandoned by Kevin and looking at a death penalty, Sabrina finally agreed to the plea deal that included testifying against Kevin. She divulges every sort of detail of their affair, his plot to kill his wife, and how he wanted to attain the money from her insurance policy to establish a new future for him and Sabrina. According to Sabrina, the plan was for them to raise Kevin and Lisa's 3-year-old daughter. Sabrina had committed the murder with the encouragement and coaching of her foster father, Kevin Knoefel, with whom she'd been having a sexual relationship. According to Sabrina, it was a love affair that began 9 months after she moved in with the Knoefels. She was 17 and he was 41. Kevin began talking about having his wife killed and confided in Sabrina about the $785,000 in life insurance policies he had on her. In his words, she was worth more dead than alive. On November 15, 2012, while driving Sabrina to school, he cried to her about how he was contemplating taking his life. Sabrina became distraught and agreed to kill Lisa herself. Kevin gave her clear instructions on how to carry out the brutal act, including twisting the blade to inflict maximum damage, and even help picking out the knife. He planned to have it happen when he was away to avoid being connected to the crime. Falling for his manipulative charm, Sabrina agreed to do exactly what he asked, and in less than 24 hours, Lisa Knoefel would be dead. On that fateful early morning of November 16, while Kevin was away, Sabrina crept into Lisa's room with a knife and plunged into her face. Lisa woke up screaming and started fighting for her life, but Sabrina would not stop. She would continue to stab and slash Lisa 180 times, ending her life. 9 months after the murder of his wife, Kevin Knoefel was taken into custody and charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated murder and complicity to aggravated murder, as well as 6 counts of sexual battery. As the prosecution's star witness, Sabrina testified against Kevin at his murder trial, revealing every detail of his plan to get rid of his wife. On June 11, 2014, after deliberating for 9.5 hours, the jury found Kevin Knoefel guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. And in August 2014, Sabrina pled guilty to aggravated murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She is incarcerated at the Dayton Correctional Institution in Montgomery County, Ohio.